it's Jeanette at the Not So Perfect Mom, and I thought it's been a while since I have done an update on what I'm reading, and I realized that, I realized that I've been doing a lot of book hauls and bookshelf tours, but I haven't really showed what I've been reading, and I have been reading, not so much this month, but last month, and I keep track of my reading by writing down. I'm old school. I like pen and paper. I write down the name of the book, the excuse me, the author, the page number, and I keep track of how many pages and how many books I've read. In January, I read 11 books. I DNF'd 1, so 12, and I read 3,381 pages. And I also keep track of if it was an audio book or a library book, manga, young adult, certain things. And this year I've decided to do the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge for 2018. So I've also been keeping track of that too and trying to mark off things. If you follow me on Instagram, you will see some of this stuff on there. And I've done a little playfulness, and I'm coloring in books that I have finished that meet the criteria. And I'm slowly working my way through those and trying to use the books that are on my shelf to actually, mark them off. And this year I want to try to read more from my shelf. I'm not going to say I'll buy less, because let's be real, if I see a really good deal, and you know that if you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I really love to buy secondhand or thrift or whatever to get it cheaper and then full price. I will do full price, but let's not go down that path. Let's actually talk about the books that I've read. So the first book in January that I finished was Green Darkness by Anya Seton, and I actually really enjoyed this one. It's a gothic romance mystery, and I actually want to replace this old paperback, but for now, this is what I have. I actually listened to it on audiobook, and I followed along with the book, because it is an older style gothic, and they tend to be very wordy and very descriptive of things. And this book is about this girl and this man who are destined to be together, but it always ends badly. So there's kind of like past lives being played out in the future. So you flash back to a time when he was a monk and she was just a poor relative of a royal. She wasn't quite a royal. She was just the niece of a aged royal, to present day when they're actually getting married and they start having problems, and there's that gothic thing to it, and it's really interesting. It's really good. If you haven't tried Anya Seton, you should give it a chance. I've got another one, Catherine, on my list to pick up later this year, hopefully. And then the next one I read is an audiobook, and that was The Truth About Love and Dukes, and it's the first book in the Dear Lady True Love series, and it's by Lee Gerke, I think is how you pronounce her last name. And I will try to insert a picture in this. If you know how to insert a picture in the video using Movie Maker Live, can you leave me a link down below to a tutorial or something how to do it? I can insert a picture, but I have to do a break in it. Anyway, back to the book. It was a pretty good book. It wasn't my favorite book, and I don't know that I would pick up the next in the series. It is about Dear Lady True Love, and she is the editor of a magazine, of a newspaper. Her father owns the newspaper, but he's an alcoholic and he can't take care of it anymore. So she basically runs it in a time when women really weren't, owning businesses. They really weren't outside of the house very much, unless they were socializing. So it was kind of nice to see the main character of the story being a working class woman, and she gives advice in the column to the main character's, the Duke's, mother. the mother writes in and says, what would you do in a situation where you've fallen in love with a man, you're not married anymore, you're widowed or whatever, and you've fallen in love with a man that's below your class station, and your family wouldn't approve of it, but you are really in love with him. And Lady Truelove gives her the advice that you should go with your heart. You should do what you're going to do. And she actually takes the advice. And of course, the Duke is very upset about this, and he's very upset about the advice. So he comes to the editor to find out why she did this and to make her fix it. And he literally puts her in a situation where she has to fix it or he's going to ruin her. Now, this is where things get really kind of irritated for me. I didn't really like his high-handed treatment of her, how he just flings her into situations and is like, deal with it, And there's a lot of classisms. There's a lot of bad treatment. Like, his sisters are really kind of cruel to her because she is a working class girl, and he's a bit of an arrogant butthead. And the story does work out to, it is enjoyable, but there were some irritations in it. So I ended up giving it a 3 stars. If it sounds like it's something to read, it's nice to read something about a working class girl instead of, the princess or whatever. So, that part of it was nice. The next book I read was a library book, and it was The Book of You by Clara Kendall. And I'm pretty sure everybody's heard of this. It's been on YouTube, and it's basically about a girl who writes a journal about the guy that is stalking her. He's basically raped her and is using that as blackmail and following her around. And while I probably shouldn't say I enjoyed it, I did enjoy it because I did like to see how she got out of the situation and how things worked out. And it was a good book. It did remind me of You by Carolyn Kepnes. The next book I read was another audiobook romance, and it was The Scottish Witch, which is the second book in the Chat and Curse. I don't know if it was a trilogy or a series, but it's by Kathy Maxwell. And I read the first book, which was, I think, was Lion's Curse last year. And if you want something completely silly that has just ridiculousness in it, this is your book. It's about a girl who was a witch, and her mother was a witch, and she fell in love with a Chatham male and got pregnant, and he pretty much left her to marry an English royalty, and she threw herself off of a building, and her mother cursed the whole Chatham line to revenge her daughter's death, Rose. And the first book is, the next is, they're all the same as far as they lead into the next book. You have to read the next book to kind of find out where the story goes. So once you do read it, you do want the next book to keep going. But it's basically, I had a few issues with the characters. Apparently it was my month to pick the books that all had arrogant jerk men in it. I don't know what that was, but Harry is the main character, and he is coming to town to try to save his brother's life. So he wants to find a witch to undo the curse. So, and the main heroine is Portia, and she is, her father's left their mother in debt, and she can barely afford anything. So she's trying to make the money to support her family. So she's pretending to be a witch. Ridiculous ensues. So go from there. And while it was a little over the top with ridiculousness, it actually was a pretty good love story, and I did end up enjoying it. The next book I read was a manga, and I checked this out at the library too, and this is Barakamen by Satsuki Yoshino, and this was the first volume, and it was the only volume that I've ever read, and I don't think I'll continue with it. It was kind of boring. It's basically about this kanji artist. That's what he does for a living. He's kind of arrogant and thinks he's all that, and so they send him into exile. Basically, he has to go into the country and practice his skill and learn to, be more creative with his kanji, I guess. and he meets a little child who is teaching him basically how to be, more. Sorry, I cut off there. I'm not really into the mangas where it's an adult interacting with a small child. My daughter was into Yatsubi, I think is how you said that one, and she got on my nerves really badly, and I couldn't do that. I'm more of I want mine to be around the same age, even if they're in high school. I can handle that a lot better than the age differences and stuff, but it was kind of boring. So the next book that I read was Fallen by Lauren Kate. I did not enjoy it, so I DNF'd that one. The next one I read, actually the next three are children's books, and I read these aloud to my kids. And the first one was Sky Sweeper. And it was actually really pretty, Japanese, Chinese. I don't remember which one right now. Sorry, this is all the way back in January. Man who, as a child, gets a job as a sweeper at a, I don't remember if it was like a monastery. It was like a temple or something, and he was content to sweep, and it was just his life being content doing what he enjoyed, which was sweeping, literally sweeping, and how people didn't understand why he continued to do that instead of, looking for a better career. And it had really gorgeous illustrations, and it was just, it does end up, spoiler, he does pass away at the end of the book. So you might want to read that one before you read it to your kids and see if that's something that they may be sensitive to. So then the next book that I read for children's book was The Magic Nesting Doll by Jacqueline K. Ogburn. And I'm going to insert a little clip from my Instagram post where I flipped through it so you can see. And this book had absolutely gorgeous illustrations. So I'm going to go ahead and insert it here. Okay, now it's a Russian fairy tale with a girl whose grandmother passes away, and she gives her I think it's called a matryoshka. It's a nesting doll, and these are gorgeous. I had a set as a child that looked similar to what she had, but not with the animals inside of it. Mine just had the same little girl inside of it. And we have a plain set here that my kids enjoyed, pulling apart and putting back together. And it's just her using these nesting dolls, because every time she opened one it would give her magic to do something, and it's a classic fairy tale. It's definitely something you should pick up and flip through, check it out at the library or buy it. It's worth buying. I thought it was gorgeous. The next book was Basho and the River Stones by Tim J. Myers, and it was also beautifully illustrated. And it's a little bit harder to explain. It was about a poor, I think he was like a monk. He lived in the forest with the wolves who walked like people, and they tried to trick him. And it's just, it was kind of a weird story, but it was actually really good. So, I mean, just look it up and you can read about it and see what you think. And it was good. The next book was The Bat, which is the first book in the Harry Hole series, and I read that for the Nordic Noir Challenge for, the Nordic Noir for the Pop Sugar Challenge, sorry, and it's by Joe Nesbo, and I actually have this book, and it took me a little bit to get into this. It's It's a little different. It's reminded me of Harry Bosch. If you've watched that on Amazon Prime, how he's kind of, you know, weird a little bit. You're not really sure what's going on in his mind, and he's kind of. But anyway, he is from Sweden, and he goes to Australia to solve. I think it's his sister's murder. It's never really clear, and it's you're introduced to a lot of characters in the beginning, and it seems kind of like they're pointless. It's like, okay, well, why are we just randomly meeting these people? And as you go further into the story, they tie in, and you finally kind of get it. I mean, they're integral. They're the main characters in the story, but you're still kind of like, why? I did end up liking it, and I probably will go on to the next book. It's a fairly large series. I don't know if I'm dedicated enough to pick up the whole series, but maybe the next one. Then the next book. Sorry. I should put her on film. It's my daughter. Okay, the next book that I read was Hush Hush by Becca Fitzpatrick. It is the first book in the Hush Hush series, I guess. And it's a YA book about fallen angels. And I kind of enjoyed it. I don't know that I would pick up the next one. I'm probably not the target audience. I've said that before. I used to really be into YA books, and I've kind of been losing it over the last couple of years, and my tastes have been varying more. And this is about a girl who goes to a new school, and she meets this boy, Patch, and they kind of got this connection, and she can't seem to, you know, stay away from him, and there's a lot of stuff going on, like paranormal stuff. I really can't go into it without giving it away, and honestly don't remember that much about it. I mean, it was good, and it had fallen angels in it, so thumbs up for that. The next book I read was Murder is Binding, which is by Lorna Barrett. Booktown Mystery, book 1. And this is about a woman named Trisha who moves from the city to this country town to own a bookshop. Like my dream job, right? So this town has been like refurbished to basically be like a bookshop town. And down the same plaza as her, there is a cookbook shop. And the woman that runs the cookbook shop is like horribly unpleasant. Everybody kind of doesn't really care for her. Well, she turns up dead, stabbed. And the whole mystery is to find out, you know, what happened to her and who's next and what's becoming of the shop. And in most cozy mysteries, the main character tends to avoid the police for every single little thing. You're like screaming at them to, why don't you just go to the cops? And, you know, of course they don't because it's a cozy mystery. Well, this was the opposite. She kind of went to the police for everything. And the police lady in this town absolutely hated her. And I got a kick out of how the author reversed that role and kind of let her do what we always say, and it backfires on her. The plot was pretty figurable. I mean, I figured it out pretty towards the end. I actually figured out what was going on, and I called some of the things. But in the end, when it works, everything works out, and you say, oh, okay, I get it. It was actually a pleasant read. I would read another book by her. Then the last book that I started but didn't finish in January was An Unquiet Mind by Kay Redfield Jamison. And this was another one off of my Pop Sugar Challenge for mental health. And this is her story of bipolar disorder. Basically her memoir of just being in the psychology field in psychiatry and having it and not giving herself the diagnosis that she needed to cope with it until later on in life, and what she went through, her manic episodes and her depressed episodes. And I found it really interesting and also kind of depressing, but it was actually really interesting, and I enjoyed that. I did finish that this month though, so I guess when I do February's what I read, I won't be talking about that book. So anyway, that's the 11 plus 1 DNF that I read this month. Sorry this video is so long. I did end up chatting a lot about it. So If you guys have read any of them or have any recommendations for me, let me know down below and we will chat. I will see you next time. Oh, and if you're new, don't forget to like and subscribe and see more videos. Bye.